And so welcome everyone for our part 2 session on working with immigrant survivors using a trauma-informed approach. Thank you all for joining us today to this June meeting. I know you guys are really busy. I was just telling Norma about this yesterday. Sometimes I feel like if I'm really busy, it probably means you guys are really busy too. And so I'm glad you were able to make the time to learn with us today and to talk about this subject. Last month we met and we had Norma share with us a presentation that she used internationally before on what trauma is, what are some trauma-informed approaches. And so raise your hand if you were able to join us last time, just so we know how much of the recap we should spend time on it. So is everybody here new to what was not able to join us last month? Or some, raise your hand if you were able to be here last month. Okay.
Sorry, I wasn't able to be here last
No,
month.
no, I understand everybody. It's and you know, we did talk about it, about how we missed a lot of you on there and how we had a really good discussions and how well that we were able to cover that material in a different way that we had seen before. And I didn't get the post report back from the recording, and I wanted you guys to have the recording before we had this session. And so that's good that I put some of the recap slides in here, and we can spend as much time as you all want on those. So that's good to know. Now we know where we're at today. And then, you know, we'll get started. I'll go ahead and share my slide. And Norma, if you want to say hello while I get the slides on.
Yeah, hi everybody. Thank you for coming. I'm looking at the weather. Oh my God, everybody's super hot and sunny weather, and some of you cloudy, however, uncomfortable weather. I know. And it seems that it's gonna be like that for a couple months. So let's just keep inside.
Are you able all to see my screen?
Yeah, we can.
We can. Okay. Great. And so here we go. And then, hi, I'm Rocio. I'm the Deputy Director of the National Immigrant Women's Advocacy Project. We don't have Zakia today because it's a religious holiday for her. We're saving her slides to start up at the next session. And then Norma already said hello. Thank you to OVW for this time. We already put in our city and state, and I encourage you to continue, if you didn't do it, to go ahead and do it, because that's how I'll know that you're here, and that's the way we could talk about laws or experiences that we have in your state. But it's hard to do that if I don't know where you're at. So do check in. It's kind of like a sign-in sheet with telling us what city, organization, and state you're in. And for our icebreaker, I know we're all tired of talking about COVID, but some of the things that we learned from COVID kind of stuck with us now, right here in 2023 and 2023. And so what is something that you bought that you still learned today, that you still have today, that you use, that you were very happy that you bought during COVID, or maybe a skill that you learned that you're now utilizing in your time? Meditative doodling. Nice. I bought an inflatable hot tub. I wanted it for a long time, but I didn't know if they were it was a good buy, and so I splurged on that, and I really love it, and it's something that I use to keep cool with. And so outdoor time, somebody adopted a cat. On air fryer. Good. No? Okay. Ice cream maker, delicious. Yeah, the air fryer does make everything really good and crispy and quick. I do like mine too. All right. Well, if you think of something that you bought or used or learned during COVID and that you still use today, feel free to share. It's always fun to learn fun facts about each other. These slides, they're just going to be a guide, and I'll share them with you at the end of this session in my follow-up email. And this was one of the slides that, and Norma, if you have any ideas, if you want me to go back further into last month's PowerPoint, I can, because I grouped it here with this. But
Yeah.
what after we covered, I think it makes sense. I love the way you explained what and look, I can even, if it doesn't make anybody's head hurt, I can go, we covered what are the types of traumas, right? How there's structural traumas, some traumas we come in with already. And then plus when we're working with survivors, there's those new traumas. And then we talked about the barriers that make those traumas maybe sometimes deepen, and that these are particular traumas that immigrants encounter. We did Norma explained to us really nicely how there's parts of the stuff in culture that impacts the trauma, and there's the stuff that we see and there's the stuff that we don't see. And I think we've all seen this iceberg. And we give some examples of what kind of trauma that immigrants might have coming in, or refugees might have coming in to our country. We talked about how working with law enforcement and victim witnesses, some victims will have trouble in how they tell their story. They might have challenges in being believed, because when you're impacted with trauma, it impacts the brain and the way you tell a story, your credibility, maybe their ability to participate in the criminal justice system, or depression, or unhealthy coping mechanisms that survivors that we might work with have, like substance abuse, or even, forgetting what happened. And we validated that as that being, their coping mechanisms, but it's what they did to survive. And so they're here with us seeking help or seeking our services, and we know that they did the right thing because they survived that trauma. And how there's the goal, right? We want to be trauma informed, but prosecutors, law enforcement also sometimes move forward with prosecutions, investigations, even when victims are not wanting to. So they have an extra challenge that maybe some of us that work in the nonprofit piece of this work have, because there's the community safety aspect and making sure that this community is safe, and sometimes prosecutions go forth without a victim, and then they're also wanting to be trauma informed, and some of us don't have those responsibilities. We talked about what it means in our work, and if there's any of these that you want to slow down on, this is the one we were going to start on. And so it was purple last week, but new app, we make everything red. And so now here it is.
Okay. So we were sharing also some practices of trauma informed. And with that being said, let's think about awareness, which is very important. It's just for us to understand the basic. I mean, we don't have to be experts, but we can know the basic about trauma and how the trauma would impact all the survivors, to understand, and their vulnerabilities, and our own trauma can be bring in the interviews or in the assessments that we're working with. So it's very important to understand the basic. And then safety, of course, in order to provide trauma-informed services, we really need to look for the safety of the victim and the safety of us also as an agency and as an advocate, So we need to look for the physical, but also the emotional. And of course, we know that there are shelters and, transitional housing and TPOs or temporary or legal protection orders that we can assist them to get safe. But let's think also about the emotional one. That portion is very important, because otherwise, the victim cannot move forward, The trustworthiness, that's super important, of course. Confidentiality, how do you create that trust between your victim, the victim that you're working with, and the collaborators, law enforcement, prosecutors, attorneys sometimes, how do you create that trust, and how do you work around confidentiality and privacy for victims? Sometimes it could be, when I start training new advocates, some of them feel that because a private attorney is calling, they need to do this or that, or maybe because law enforcement is knocking the door and they're asking about a victim, we have to, which is, we know that we don't have to actually, you always have to look for the safety and the confidentiality. And unless you don't have a release of information, you are not supposed to be sharing absolutely anything. You can just deny or confirm. You cannot deny or confirm anything about the victim. But sometimes, it's very, even for advocates, it's very a challenge, when you are looking to a law enforcement or several law enforcement officers coming to your agency asking for information or things like that. And that's how we're going to be talking about that. It's very important to have that collaboration where the authorities and prosecutors know their role, our role, everybody's role, and then we can really collaborate instead of just demanding some information or whatever. Now, empowerment is a very important part. Of course, we have to empower the clients, but we also have to create this collaboration where we can be sure that when we're sharing with them about the rights and entitlements that the victim have, they are going to really access to them, right? And of course, prioritizing their decisions. That's super important. In this path, we sometimes know what would be like the best for them. However, we know as advocates that that's not our role. We are empowering them. We're going to be informing them their rights, the possible outcomes of some of their decisions. And then they are the only ones who have the power to decide. And even though sometimes we're going to be looking of some bad decisions, bad decisions in the sense that we know the consequences of those decisions. However, we just have to support them. And of course, to be inclusive, that's super important. I know that this is like a very fancy word that everybody is saying around, we're inclusive, but what does that mean? Are we really open to receive everybody, or we're just saying, are you working with all the communities, LGBTQ, these people with disability? Do you really know what to do when you receive a person like that? And of course, when we're working with immigrants, we have to be inclusive to all of them. And that takes us to the part that we already talked about, cultural, religion, traditions, I don't know, everything, language, of course, right? So yeah, that's the part. Can you move to the next one?
Yeah. So these were the points. This one is the foundation, right? Like Norma said, safety and trustworthiness. If you don't have this, you're not going to be able to move to be trauma informed. And that is having that warm connection, letting them know this is a safe place, letting them know the confidentialities that exist so that there's the trust, and then keeping yourself honest, responsible, and having that humility to continue learning. With this, I see that you're always learning and you're always listening. It probably should have put two little icons right there of an ear and then learning, because we're always going to be learning and listening to build this safety and trustworthiness. Oh. So these were the big points of what advocacy wasn't, and I love the way you put this together.
Yeah, and actually, I mean, I know that maybe all of you already know this, but a good reminder, I mean, it's not a bad idea, just to remind that you know, you shouldn't be getting frustrated. And I know that this work is hard. However, I mean, frustration just because the things were not moving forward as fast as you were thinking or as you would like to, I mean, that's not advocacy, right? I mean, referring a victim to agencies she doesn't want. Sometimes, again, we think that probably, and you know, I have so many times where I'm telling them, go to the doctor, please get a checkup, please, it's important, and they don't want to. And even though I provide all the information about good resources and medical that is going to be free and they speak Spanish or any other language, I mean, if they don't want to, and that's the part where I cannot get frustrated, is their decision, right? Thinking that their reactions are inappropriate. Sometimes we think about that, right? And then we have to move back and think about our own biases. And then we can say, well, I'm not here to judge any of their decision, any of their reaction. I'm just here to support them. Believing that you're a superhero. Sometimes, I mean, we're super motivated about this type of work, you know, and we really want to help everybody, but we are not heroes in the sense that we cannot save everybody. We're not firefighters, so we're not getting into the fire and saving everybody. That's not our role, you know. And think about that, because you can put yourself also in a very risky situation. And again, we're in the trauma-informed services, we're thinking about their safe, but also ours. Encouraging the victim to think of herself only as a victim. I mean, we as advocates know that we can use this language, you know, as a victim and then as a survivor because they're out. But then when we're in the legal advocacy services, we're thinking about a perpetrator and sometimes, you know, respondent. And, you know, there's so many ways to talk depending on where we are. However, the victim must move forward, you know, and when you empower them, and then when they gain again the power and control of their lives, their decisions, their children, I mean, they can look at themselves as something else, not just a victim. Can you go to the next one? Forgetting that the victim is in crisis. Sometimes we are having so many things to do at the same time that we don't have the tolerance or the patience or the time to talk to the victim, and we might think that that she is exaggerating, you know, or overreacting. I mean, don't forget that part. In our advocacy work, I mean, she is in crisis not just one time, every time probably that she's going to be talking with you. Rescuing a victim or encouraging her to depend on you, I mean, that's the worst ethic, you know, practice, because definitely, I mean, again, we want to give them back the power and control of their own lives, so we don't want them to take decisions just because of us, you know, or that they can call us 20 times per day just asking so many questions so we can lead them to the answer. I mean, they have to start gaining that power to take their own decisions. And then thinking that you can protect a victim, again, we know that there's authorities, I mean, there's processes, I mean, we can do that, but we never can assure that something else is not going to happen, no? Unfortunately, we cannot assure that the abuser is, even with a TPO, even with conditions of bond, even with, no, he's going to be doing something against her or her family. Thinking that you are going to influence that changes in the victim's life. I mean, that's not our goal. I mean, we just inform, support, help them to go through the processes that might help, but that's it. And then pushing the victims, you know, pushing the survivor that we're working with in order to talk or to deal with things that she's not ready is the, I mean, that's not advocacy. I mean, we just have to inform. And again, we can be clear and we can be transparent and we can tell them, you know, I'm worried about your safety because the lethality assessment that I made indicates that probably the next step, I mean, he will kill you, you know, but that's it. I mean, we cannot take decisions on them and we cannot push them just to get out of your house and let's do this or that, you know. And of course, friendship, you know, we have to respect our own boundaries and to respect that limit where you are the professional and they are just clients. Next.
Yeah,
Or do you want to say something?
well, you know, it goes with this. It's like, yeah, last time we talked about why you want to be being trauma informed, right? Because it's going to help you provide the service better. It's going to help them heal. It's just the more what we should be doing in our work. But here I wanted to tell you about why it also helps the cases. And I was thinking about over here, this point that you said about getting them to move as fast as you like. And then now I'm going to talk about why we need all this information on trauma. And one example that comes to mind is clients that are applying for the U visa. Okay, so I'm thinking if somebody's going to apply for the U visa, they have to participate in one way or another in the criminal justice system, whether it's seeking a protection order, reporting to law enforcement, working with prosecutors, working with child protective agencies or adult protective agencies. But not all survivors will want to work with the criminal justice system. They might have their own experience with the criminal justice system. And so that's justice system that hasn't been fair to them. Maybe they're coming from Black and brown communities where they don't trust criminals justice. And so here is one of those points where you might be frustrated and you would think, if you only reported, if you only didn't recant, if you only participated in the criminal justice system, you would have access to more service or you would be safer because you'd have immigration status. And that's one of those things where I'm thinking, here's where I might get frustrated. And last time we also talked about for VAWA self-petitioners. I've worked with people that are applying for VAWA self-petition and then they get back together with the abuser or the perpetrator. And you can still apply, you know, big point here is you can still apply if they get back together with the abuser. And it also happens with U visa clients, and that could be another point where you could get frustrated. But again, that's not for us to decide. You have to respect the agency and the empowerment that they made, and they can still apply for VAWA or U visa. And I remember last time we were talking about when we're working with clients and they're doing their stories or their statements for the VAWA or the U visa cases. And it happens where you let them know, hey, you know, part of the process is you're going to write your story. We're going to tell them how the elements are, how you're eligible for VAWA and U visa. And we're going to write all the elements down and then we'll review them. So here's, sometimes if the client can write, I would give them a worksheet. Or I would say next time that you come, we're going to do this and we're going to write the story. And that's when they would disappear. Mm-hmm. And that's when you're calling them and like, oh, how are you doing? I saw that you rescheduled, or when are you going to be able to come? You told me you would call me. And so it's because they're moving, we're got to move at their pace. And there's times that we need to move a little faster. Maybe the certification is expiring, or you want them to have that stability that immigration status gives them. And so that's the places where I see it's challenging, and you have to remember these points first before I'm thinking, I got to file this case. I got to meet my deliverables. I want her to have immigration status so she can work, because these things are hard and I need to recognize the trauma that they're in.
And thank you for saying that part, because it's very important when you are working. I mean, when you are working in a U visa or VAWA, I mean, there are some things that maybe she is not bringing, like the passports, you know, and things like that. And you have the deadline of your certification. I mean, there are ways where you can send it before it expires. However, if it's the narrative, you cannot move forward. And you can
Yeah.
just tell them, it's very important for me to know to do the narrative, and that's why I need to understand your story. And if you don't come, or you don't have the time, or you don't make the time, this will expire. And sometimes it expires, but
Yeah.
it's their decision, right?
And right there, Soki is saying that this happened to them this week, and I was curious to know if you wanted to share that with us. If you do, just let me know, raise your
Hey.
hand, or there you
Hey
go.
everyone.
Yeah.
Let me move my screen over. Can you hear me okay? I have these weird headphones in today.
We
Yeah.
hear you great.
So yeah, my name's Soka. In case somebody doesn't know me, I'm one of the certifiers here for Cobb County District Attorney's Office. And this past week, we had somebody that came in for a second certification. They were certified, they were approved for their use status, and now they needed a second certification to adjust their status. But what happened is, as soon as trial was over, they were cooperative till that point. They already had their view, everything finished. Then they decide to spread on the media and things like that this never happened, and that her girls were forced to say that it did. And so she became uncooperative at that point once the case was over. This is a case that happened years ago. And so just to give you a little background, this case was a 21 count indictment. It was a very awful child molestation incest case. And so it was very heavy. And at the time, she was very cooperative with her girls. And was certified years later, when the second time comes around, it's like, you said some things after trial and did not want to cooperate anymore after trial. And I think maybe she thought that she's got the first certification, she's good to go, but it really sucks, for better or worse, especially for her girls, who are now adults, who luckily they were able to get use status as well. We were able to help them because they were children. So we certified for them, but our office didn't feel comfortable certifying for the mother, because at that point, I can't in good faith say, yes, she was cooperative this entire time. So it's really frustrating. And I know that a lot of things happen, but it would be nice, ideal world for clients to know. It's like, when you're cooperative, you're kind of cooperative till the end. You don't flip flop back and forth. And it can be taken away. Not that that's our goal or nothing like that, but it is something that can be taken away, and it really sucks. I wish the outcome would have been different, but that's just kind of like what it was.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I wonder how much of that. So I wonder what the reasons were behind her doing that. Right, we'll never know.
But thank you for sharing, because definitely, I think it's a case by case, right? If it expires and then it was because they didn't get the passport for the minor at the consulate, because there's a huge process also. And some of the consulates, they don't even give the passport just because the father is not going to be signing the authorization. Okay, that's a different story. But yeah, sometimes it is what it is. And again, that's why it's very important to create that collaboration with the victim advocate or the attorney, or I don't know who is helping this, or the agency, the nonprofit that is providing immigration services, so they can understand, that part, and you can communicate with them also and let them know, at this point, I'm not going to be able to recertify somebody.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, so learning about the trauma can help when you're doing the safety planning, right? You'll know where to focus your safety planning because of the triggers that the client might already have, or by the stories that they give you. It can help you in asking for those protection orders and how to write that statement that we attach to those forms. It could help you in the testimony, preparing a client for court as a victim witness, knowing what are the triggers, knowing the whole story. Maybe there's more crimes there and more serious ones that you don't even know until you do an in-depth questionnaire. It helps you in a family law case when you're trying to show that there was abuse or in custody. In VAWA self-petition, it helps you with those declarations, and in U visa and T visa. And so while it helps us be better advocates and better there for our clients, it also helps us in our cases. I'm gonna stop share. But one of the reasons that you want to let them, also want to let the client, you want to let them know why you want to know these traumas. You're not doing it just to be, super nosy, because you're going to ask them about their childhood. And so you're going to ask them personal questions. So before you even take out the questionnaire or start asking questions, let them know why you're interested in identification. What are you going to do with that information? You want to know details, some details. You can tell them, I'm going to ask you some details. You tell me up until where you feel comfortable. You let them know that this interview is going to take time. If you're working with interpreters, know that it's going to take double the time. If for some reason, for the urgency of what you need this protection order for, or I think you gave me a really good example, Norma, when we were putting this together, about how if you're wanting to know for the protection order, it's different than if you want for this. And sometimes you just got to prioritize and let them know for what reason based on the time, right? You're going to recognize that somebody might never have taken the, go ahead.
No, and I was going to say, and definitely, I mean, it's important to know that, because maybe for the temporary protective order, you really need to do it right away, because it's the only way that she's going to be safe. And maybe she feels comfortable. And I'm going to say she, but it could be he, right? But feels comfortable, and they want to talk to you about, when they were children, and then what happened in their, I mean, the information that you will need, but not for this. Right? You will need it probably for the U visa, or probably for any other process, but not just for the protective order, because the judge is leaving. You really try to figure it out how to write down. So, I mean, there are skills that we learn through this work where but the main point is just to be transparent with them and let them know, right now, I just need this information that I'm going to ask you, because I really need to move forward as soon as possible, because I don't want the judge to leave, because then it's going to be Saturday and Sunday, and you really need to have this protective order. But we will meet again, and we will have the time so you can disclose more, because we will be working for something else, for the U visa, and I need to learn all your story, or for another assessment that I had to do in order for you to, I don't know, get into the transitional housing program, or whatever else, where you need those information. And when they feel comfortable, I mean, they understand that part, and they can slow down, and they can, focus probably in just the information that you need. And it helps also when we're preparing them to go in front of a judge, right? Because the judge is going to be asking them questions, and we don't want them to start talking about, when they were children, or what happened in their country of origin, because maybe it's not related, but they just want to talk. So we have to explain them when is going to be the best moment to talk to us about everything, and when it's going to be the moment just to answer the questions that the judge is asking. Just saying. Rocio, next.
Yeah, the same. I've had it. I've worked with survivors, and we're trying to talk about the crime, or I'm trying to talk about what happened, and they're kind of trying to tell you about how he cheated, or how he had all these, other things that are not to the point of what we're doing. But you kind of need to, once you explain, this is what, listen respectfully, but then also explain the purpose, like you said, of why we're doing what we're doing. The other thing was, we all have to learn how to, if we're going to ask these questions, if we're going to have these questionnaires, we have to learn what we're going to do if somebody's triggered emotionally or goes into crisis while we're asking them the questions. There are experts. There's maybe some of us work with partners and within our own agencies that have all the letters after their names that say that they can work with survivors in that way. But you are also an expert too. You've worked years with survivors, and we don't know when somebody's going to be triggered. And so we need to be able to have those tools and be able to deal and manage somebody that goes into crisis and be able to regulate those emotions. So we're going to talk a little bit about that today. So here's what one of the questionnaires looks like. I'm gonna stop share. This one's a more broad one. This one is one that Norma shared with me. Right now, we should be looking at the screen with everybody, right?
Yes.
Okay.
And let us know if you have any suggestion or any comment, because that's super important. We can learn from each other, you know, and we can learn best practices that you have already implemented in your agencies.
Yeah, and that's good that you bring that up. So last session, Norma shared with us her office space, and you'll see when I share with you those slides, she has a beautiful office space, and it's very soothing. But we brought it up to the group so that we can critique it, and we've learned a lot of interesting things about it. And so here again, thank you, Norma, for sharing us this individual assessment. And if you have others, let us know, because we could even put one together, and it'll be, give credit to all the agencies and all the authors. But this is a really nice one that Norma shared with me, and you're able to see it on my screen, right? On your screen?
Yes.
Yeah, great. And so first it covers the relationship history.
Mm-hmm.
And why do you think it would be important? Or Norma, why would you ask them how many times they've separated?
Well, before this, let me let you know that this assessment is not made in one day or in 1 hour or in one session. I mean, we usually think that probably between 3 to 6 months, even, because it depends on the client. And sometimes you can ask these questions and the client is going to be feeling comfortable answering them. And sometimes she just start crying and getting crisis, and then we have to stop and we have to move for another session or things like that, But of course, that part is that this question helps in everything, If you're working for a temporary protective order and then it's going to be another one, or they dismiss the previous one, or they are going to be filing against the same person or a different one, and for immigration also, right?
So then you have last incident of abuse. What happened? Was police called? Worst incident?
Mm-hmm.
And then you want to know if police was called, probably maybe to access police reports, knowing if they exist, if they were arrested, first incident.
And of course, she's not going to be answering, yes, I called the police. Yes, he was arrested. Yes, no. They usually, if you create that comfortable or comfort space, they're going to start telling you all the details about everything, right? So that takes time.
And then some of our clients may not be able to read or write, even in their own native language, and that's going to take a more time.
Well, that's another trauma-informed practice. We never provide the questionnaires to them. We read them, we talk. We make this conversation rather than just a questionnaire, Because usually, I mean, people don't like to fill out questionnaires, and they don't even know how, why, So our practice is, this is the individual assessment, and this is one of so many other forms that we use. Of course, we use the intake. We have, another legal intake if we're working for an immigration intake if we're working with immigration, but we don't give it to them. And when it's a conversation where we're, this document is for us as advocates, and we're just looking at what else is missing while we are talking with them,
Yeah. I like that you asked, who is in your support system? That's good to know if there's other people involved to support them. Here you go into asking about previous abuse.
And of course, usually working with immigrants, they don't have a support system, right? I mean, I was talking recently to one that was saying, well, my support system is in Mexico. And I'm like, well, no, because you are here, right? I mean, what happens if something happens to you? And sometimes we need to tell that to the victims so they can realize how important it is to have a support system in the country, right?
I put the link here, if you guys want to follow along on your own computer. And then so you're also even asking about natural disasters, because those could impact how you navigate economic status. Impacted by being, being exposure to wars. That can help you in even screening for immigration remedies.
Mhm.
Like to see if they're eligible for maybe asylum or something else. I see here the physical assault or assaulted by a stranger. If you weren't able to catch it before, maybe this is where you could see, oh wow, they may be a victim of a crime. Same thing with assault of weapon or kidnapping.
And
Then
Jacqueline is sharing that, asking actually, has there been some consideration of recording the victim so they are not in the position of retelling the story more than once? I would say yes, but you have to ask. You have to ask her. And then, what do you say, Rocio, about that? I've never done that actually, because I mean, we usually fill out in handwriting, or sometimes in handwriting and sometimes in front of the client.
yeah.
But what would you say?
I think if it's gonna be several people in the office that are going to need this information. So I've always worked somewhere where I'm doing everything. Well, then I'm there. But if there's gonna be different wheels and different pieces of information, maybe with their permission, I don't see what would be wrong with that. Especially nowadays, sometimes people might feel comfortable doing it on Zoom. And that really just lends itself for them to be in their own safe space if being in your office is a challenge to them. But I think it's fine as long as you get their permission. But I wonder how they would feel about having some of those things recorded, because I do think a lot. I think twice if I know something's being recorded.
And the other thing that you might have is a plan in your own organization, because what are you going to be doing with that evidence? At the end of the day, it's evidence, So is the court going to ask for it, or are you going to be destroying it after you already made all your notes or something like that?
Yeah, and so maybe that's really good. Would be working for like victim witness, like Jacqueline works at a DA's office. But it might not work the same for nonprofit, because we might get subpoena for that, right?
Exactly, for the evidence. There's
Yeah.
another question. If they are a victim and a potential witness, would the defense want a copy?
Yeah, that's why I said that. It was their idea.
Exactly.
But yeah, the other thing I would do before looking at this questionnaire, sometimes in intake, they give protection orders, police reports, documents. I kind of try to do a little bit of homework, even if it's at no rush. I try to look as much or the court system. I know in Wisconsin, you can just like look up the last name and see what court cases. I try to see what other things are out there, because it gives me a gleaning of information of what to ask and what to focus on. But I wouldn't let that, I'll try not to let myself narrow myself down to just that, because the point of asking these questions is to learn more. And I like this because I think in between some of these questions, there's some grounding in there. Like, what do you love about your children? I'm thinking, oh, I don't have the time in my day to ask people what they love about their children. But I think that when you're asking the heavy questions, you're balancing it there, and you're going to learn information about there that's useful for your case. Therapy and health insurance. We know that immigrant survivors will have a lot of challenges to accessing that. I think this is a good questionnaire to get to learn more and to learn more about trauma. And I was telling Norma, I want to show yours first because it's very broad. It can be used for any protection orders. It could be used for any of the immigration applications. It could be used for family law cases. And so I invite you to look at it. If you have any ideas to improve it, we can make one and create one from this community of practice. But it's good. It covers a lot of information. And so thank you for showing us this one.
And again,
No.
this is just an example. I mean, this is something that it has been working for us for different purposes. Because again, Cherokee Family Violence Center, we have shelter, we have transitional housing program, we assist, to file temporary protective orders. We also do immigration. I mean, so many. So this has been working for us, but that doesn't mean that it's going to be helpful for you. I mean, take a look to you. I would suggest for you to take a look to your intakes or your assessments, so you can figure it out what would work for the services that you're providing. And of course, for victim advocates at the courthouse, I mean, or with prosecutors, that's going to be different, or victim advocates working in law enforcement, right? I mean, so it's just an idea, so you can see what information would be taken from these or not.
Yeah, and it's a good example of a holistic, because I see you guys touch on a lot, everything.
Thank you.
I wanted to show you one that we use for the VAWA self-petition. And then, it has the caveats, right? What I was saying about making sure it takes time, letting them know the purpose of why you're asking them these questions. But this one just focuses on the elements of the VAWA self-petition. So where did you meet the abuser? When did you start living together? How long did you date? Where did you go on honeymoon? Questions that can help you write a good declaration to establish, because the requirements of the VAWA self-petition are that it's a legal marriage, that it's a good faith marriage, that they lived together at one point, that there was battery and extreme cruelty, and that they're a person of good moral character. And so this questionnaire does the same thing. And again, it's not meant to be handed out to the survivor. And many of the survivors don't. We do have it translated in Spanish. I'll share the link when I'm able to, or definitely in the follow-up email. But it does cover those questions for you to be able to help them put together this story. And get the elements of the VAWA self-petition. And so we have one of these for VAWA self-petition, and we have one for U-Visa, and they're very useful in being able to show how they were harmed, being able to bring out the battery and the extreme cruelty, and they make for stronger cases. Mm-hmm. And what the psychologist that we worked with told us, and that put together these questionnaires, is by writing this declaration, what you guys put together, what we put together for immigration, maybe what you put together in a protection order, and getting that story down on paper, and there's some survivors that are capable of writing the story together. I've been guilty of, and I don't know, maybe not best practice, but I've been guilty of saying, why don't you write a little bit about this and then bring it back in a couple weeks, and then I'll edit it and we'll work on it together. But and you have to gauge, which ones are able to do that. But when you're done with the final product, you see us, and you read it back to them just to make sure that it's legally sound and everything in there is true. There is a sigh of relief, a sigh of, I feel good that this is written, that this is out, that this is not just in me. And so when I heard her and she said the writings, she calls it the writing intervention, and the retelling of the story, and then the writing, and then the reading it back, it has a form of healing there for the survivors. And when she told me that, I said, yeah, I've seen it. But, which is why we're going to talk about self-care after this, it does weigh very heavily on the person that's helping, which is us.
And I really like that the victims advocates for DAs and solicitors are sharing, you know, their point of view about this information, because for them would be totally different, right? And if you are protecting the victim, you need to figure out exactly what you're going to be asking and what you wouldn't, you don't want or don't need to know, you know, in order not to disclose to the defense. So yeah, thank you for Jacqueline and Saki sharing all these in the chat, because yes, I mean, it's a different perspective, right? For the advocacy services that we're providing. However, I would share with you something, you know, we provide transportation, but we usually do it through Uber or Lyft or something like that. But then when we have to go to the consulates because we need a passport for a minor, and you know, there's a huge process that we already have set with them, where I send an email first explaining, you know, this is a victim of domestic violence or whatever, and we're going to be filing or applying for a U visa, but we need the passport of the minor because, you know, he's undocumented at that. And then when they give us an appointment, we usually drive them to the consulate, just because the consul usually wants us to be there and actually bring some letters signed by me, and usually, you know, and through that time that takes an hour and a half to get to the consulate is the best time where we learn more about the client, you know, where they can disclose a little bit more, because we're talking about, you know, my advocate is driving and the client is just sharing and they're talking about life, and then they disclose sometimes some things that I have that my advocates bring back and say, hey, we can use this for the U visa, you know, because she during all these sessions that we already have with her, she was not disclosing this, but look at this that she was sharing, you know, making this comfortable time with them for an hour and a half and then coming back for an hour and a half, and that's super helpful. So that space, I'm just giving some ideas of what would you be using to create that comfortable time with them where they can disclose a little bit more rather than just reading a questionnaire, right?
Yeah, and so good point. You wouldn't want to do this questionnaire on your first meeting, maybe not your second meeting. It may be around 3, 4, and then there's certain, you know, advocates that are, it's system based. We learned today that they want to know some of this stuff, but not in writing. And who knows how useful it is in their case. Maybe they can tell us about that. And one really good point that Jacqueline makes. Okay, so I'm talking about this declaration for U visa and for VAWA. Those are things that we would never want to submit to certifiers or law enforcement or district attorneys, because they have an obligation to turn over anything that they have for the criminal case. And so and this class isn't about U visa certifications, but it's a good time to make that point that when we're requesting certifications, those of us that do work with law enforcement or prosecutors, to just stay in the 4 corners of what the police report says. And so the certifiers are not looking to see how the crime impacted them. They're only looking at, are they a victim of that crime? Did they have that information, and were they helpful? And so in most cases, a police report will have that information. And so you want to just stay on what's in that police report. You'd never want to attach medical things. You never want to attach how you say that this crime impacted them, because that's not what they're looking at, and what's there could impact the criminal case. And so if you have questions about that and you want me to look over any of that, that's my job. I'm here to help you look over anything you want. So email me, but we have to be careful with what we share with them, because everything we give them goes back to defense attorney and can impact the criminal case. Another, let me look at this really quick.
And again, I think that creating that collaboration between the agency and the prosecutor might be helpful, because I mean, you can talk about this, right? And then the agency or the nonprofit can say, well, I'm going to just send a request, a simple letter, you know, in letterhead saying, I'm sorry, can you help us to certify this, and just sharing the certification or the immigration form, and that's it. And
Yeah.
that's it.
And well, one question that Jackie asked is it'd be good to learn from those helping the victims. What would be helpful that they could give us? And I would say, and you guys also on here chime in, anything in there that shows that they were helpful. So a lot of times we might not have all the police reports or those documents, but anything that shows that they're helpful. There is an opportunity there in the certifying box that says, did you observe or were they injured? And that's where you could put what you saw. So maybe we didn't get the access to those pictures, but you could see, I can see the bruising, or I can see, I think sometimes with sexual assault cases, you know, of course, you're not going to see the injury like you would with a physical assault, but, you know, based on my experience, sexual, you know, or just put again, they were sexually assaulted, the injuries, you know, will manifest more with time. Maybe that's going into it a little bit too deep, but if you observe any injuries and you can see it there from the file, then that would be a good place to add.
And also, I think it's important because, of course, you as a victim advocate may know better, you know, what your DA or your solicitor is gonna request on those letters, right? Maybe nothing. Maybe the collaboration has been already very good for so long, and they're just going to be saying, okay, I trust this agency when they are asking for certification because we have been working with them for so long. So just a letterhead asking the certification and just that, right? Because we have all the evidence as victim, you know, as the solicitor or DAs, and we can just disclose a little bit more, or maybe not, or maybe they want you to prepare as much as Rocio was saying, you know, as much as share on that form or not. So I think communication and collaboration really opens the door.
Yeah. And then just knowing whatever you give them is discoverable to the other side. And so the least information that you give extra that's outside of the court record or outside of the police report, the better. And so you want to tell them why you're putting together these writings. Let's see what else we have. Oh, you know, with the trauma, you're going to have the patience for the difference in time frames and for the different purposes. And so there's going to be times that you revisit, that you need to go back. One of the examples that we gave was the time frame of when an immigrant survivor entered the country. And I shared with you last time how that is one of the hardest questions that we ask them. To narrow it down to a month, day, and year is very impossible. It could be because there were several attempts to enter. And it also can be how traumatic the experience was of living in their home country and coming here. And sadly, a lot of times it's because they experienced trauma and crimes along the way. And so that's something that as a coping mechanism, they've really tried to forget. And so on a first meeting, I'll try to get a time frame of when it was. Maybe later when we're actually starting to do the forms, I'll say, you know, we need to go back to look at the time frame. You told me that it was in 2023. Sometimes the biggest clue is the births of children. Well, you know, it couldn't have been in 2021 because I saw that your daughter was born in 2020 and she was born in US. So let's look at this a little more. And then sometimes you go with, was it hot when you crossed over? Had Christmas already passed? What was your first Christmas like in the US? But it gets really hard because of the trauma involved and when they entered, but that entry date is very important for immigration purposes. So it's something that you've got to try to work with to get as best an accurate date as possible. And then that survivor's story is a really important piece of evidence. It's the number one thing that's going to show immigration, their story in their voice, you know, is, and there are some cases where you're working really fast, and I'm sure you do it in protection orders, where you're just putting what you need to put in the story. This happened, that happened, and you write it down and you type it for them really fast, and then you read it back to them in Spanish or in English in their other language with a translator, and you get it signed and you get that order. But the most strongest cases will be written in the survivor's voice, in words that they're going to use, describing what happened, and not in legal terms, right? They're not going to, you know, I was sexually assaulted in the 2nd degree by this perpetrator. No, you would say exactly what happened, and then how it impacted them. So you would look at how it impacted them physically, how it impacted their family, how it impacted them financially, how it impacted their children, all the various ways that it impacted them long-term, short-term. And then we covered, these are other tools that are a little more sophisticated, but that we also have in the NUAP website that I'll show you. But it also shows the life event questionnaire of traumas that they have throughout a lifetime. It covers different types of domestic violence that includes coercive control, which in the most, sometimes when you ask the questions, you don't learn about the coercive control that you would in these questionnaires. And then there's also a danger assessment and an indigenous trauma tool. There's also, and we had somebody from stalking come and visit us in our community of practice. I don't think not yet, but I also wanted to share with you a stalking tool that the Spark Resource Center has. And you know, stalking is a really high in the lethality assessment, and it happens to our survivors before their separation, and I sometimes see it most post separation, right, when an abuser or perpetrator loses control of this working with the survivor. And so this stalking tool is a questionnaire that an advocate fills out, and it tells you how high on the lethality assessment is. It tells you different behaviors and how dangerous they are, and they're really helpful in writing a protection order against a stalker. And I've also used them in my immigration cases, and I just rewrite their words but in my own words and fit the facts. And that tool's really good. I'm gonna, right now when Norma's talking, I'm gonna share with you that tool, but there's tools there to help us.
And also they have this law, and we adequate that to our agency, the stalking law, where you can describe the date, if they call law enforcement or not, if there was witnesses, if, something happens, if the stalker was arrested or not. And that log that describe all the dates, that is super helpful for the protective order, but also for the immigration case, right? Because you have like all the story of all the abuse that has been. And of course, stalking is difficult. Sometimes, proving stalking even for a temporary protective order, it would be difficult. But if you have like all these assessment, but as well as the story or history of all the stalking that he or she has been doing, that is super helpful to write the narrative or to provide the evidence.
Yeah, and so I shared the link to that tool, and then I went through a couple of the questions there that say yes, I agree, I'm safe, I'm in a computer. I went through that, but I wanted to show you. And so it tells the narrative of the stalking, and you click through it with the survivor, and you can go through mail, the name. And so at the end of this, it'll give you a good story of the frequency and the dangers of the stalking. And when you have a minute, I invite you to check that out, because that's very helpful tool. And then stalking is also one of the behaviors that can qualify somebody for your visa. It's also very dangerous, and lethality is very important in safety planning. And also one of the Oh, there you go. Good
I
stuff.
yeah, I just want to share this, the stalking incident log, you know. I think this is super helpful, you know, the date, the time, the description of the incident, the location, if there was witnesses or not, if they called the police, if what is the name of the officer, you know, because sometimes law enforcement is not gonna make an incident report for stalking, because even for them, sometimes they are not sure if they consider it stalking or not. However, if you have the incident report, if there was an incident, you know, you can read the narrative of law enforcement, and that would be helpful. But that these sometimes we provide sometimes this to our clients because for them it would be helpful also to remind, you know, how many times he has been stalking and the ways that he has been stalking. And then when they provide this to you or you have this information, that would be helpful for everything, for protective order or for immigration case.
Yeah, and I'll, if you share that with us, I'll share it with the group, Norma.
Sure.
Here's the one from Spark, but I like the way yours was. But I mean, that's how we learn from each other. We'll see what the TA provider has, and then it's you that the tweaks that we personalize that make it useful for us, right? So, you know, let's have a little interaction about this. If you guys have any tools that you use, questionnaires like the ones that Norma shared, if you have a log similar or other assessment tools, send them to me. I'll look at them and I'll see if we can put one together from our group, and it can be a product that we all use because, you know, a lot more heads are better than one. And so, yes, email me and share those with me, or send me links if they're already up on the web somewhere. So let's talk a little bit about what you do when somebody goes into crisis. While you do that, or while somebody decides to tell a story, I'll tell you, when I was new at practicing, I had a client who had an immigration court. We were going to Chicago in 2 days for their court hearing. They were a survivor of human trafficking and had a lot of trauma because of it. And the advocates didn't understand her behavior or her outbursts. And so they sent her to a facility where she was being, a mental health facility where she was stuck on a 72-hour hold. And that was during the time that I had to take her to Chicago. And so it took a lot of advocate. And I think maybe if the advocates that were working with her in the beginning understood the trauma and why she was having those outbursts of behaviors, maybe they would not have sent her to this facility and had a hold on that, put a mental health hold on her. But as a new baby lawyer, I'm like, I have to get her to immigration court. She's going to get deported. They're not going to care that she's in a facility. And so on the very last day, I wanted to check her out of it. I asked that somebody else from our organization come with me to go check her out, because I didn't want to go by myself, you know, drive the 2 hours to go get her, then drive the 3 hours to go to court in Chicago. And it was hard to get them to let me do that. It was hard for them to approve it budget wise, because why do we need 2 people to do this? But I didn't want to do it by myself. I thought it was a 2-person job. And so at the time I didn't know the tools other than the ones God and my mom and I know as a human to help someone in crisis. And she was fine in the car, and we ate, we got her in a hotel room, but I was very nervous that night, and I wish I would have had more tools to know what to do if she went into crisis. And so what are some of the ways that you guys have experienced a survivor going into crisis, and how do you support them?
Anyone who would like to share? I mean, sometimes we have to be super creative, right? In order to understand. Well, I'm going to share one that it was super funny, that actually again, talking about driving the people to the consulate, when we started this relationship with the consul, I drove one of my clients to the consulate, and we were working an immigration case, but again, I needed the passport for the minor, so we went over there, and she was kind of stressful, because even though it's her country, I mean, you know, it's the authority of the country and the consulates and things like that. So when we came, I saw that she was in crisis sometimes, you know, the consular officer was asking some simple questions. However, she was really in distress during that time. So when we finished that appointment and we got the passport, I mean, she was hungry, but really was in crisis, right? So we stopped in a place. I asked her, do you want us to eat? Do you want us to have lunch somewhere? And she was like, well, can we go to a Mexican supermarket that is just closer to here in 1 block? Yes, let's go. You know, I want her just to feel comfortable. So she came inside, and I told her, I'm going to wait in the car because I have to make some phone calls. But yeah, buy whatever you need or drink whatever you have, and then we can go back to the office. And then she came with some, you know, with the shopping bags and so, but I didn't ask her anything. So she came inside the car, and then I said, are you ready? Okay, let's go. And I started driving, and then she was like, Norma, she was telling me in Spanish, cómete esta piernita, you know, eat this leg. And I was like, what? But I was driving. I was just not looking at her. And when I looked, she brought a chicken, you know, a roasted chicken, and she was giving me a huge, big leg of chicken while I was driving. And I was like, no, I'm not hungry. Cómete esta piernita, eat this chicken, you know, because so we can share this meal together, even though you are driving. So I was like, oh my God, I'm driving. I cannot eat chicken, you know, with my hand, bare hand, and then driving. It was so funny. And at the end, well, I ended with my piernita de pollo. She said, eating this piernita de pollo, you know, and it was super funny. And but that was comfortable for her. And actually, I mean, I couldn't eat. I just, you know, bite a little bit and that's it. But then she felt that I was sharing something with her, you know, a meal. And then she started disclosing easily when we were working in their immigration case. So that was helpful. Mi piernita de pollo.
That's funny. So yeah, you know, making them feel comfortable, validating, like, I'm really sorry this happened to you. You know, I was telling Norman, I was like, oh, when somebody starts crying out, I want to cry. Norman's like, no, you don't cry. I'm all like, no, it's when they're telling me thank you and they're so helpful. I was like, she's like, okay, then you can cry. But you know, crying with them is not helpful to somebody that is in crisis. And so, you know, letting them know where they are. They say that those are the self-regulating techniques. I don't know if you guys have heard of them, but letting them know, you know, breathe the air, feel where they are, breathing techniques. And so I'm going to share with you from this slide and in the link when I get a chance, these other tools that the professionals have shared with us. And I thought more of us could, if there's something else more in the chat about who can tell us about what they've done when survivors have gone into crisis. But you know, this is something to look into before it happens, and definitely before you ask about traumatic experience. So make sure you know what to do. And you know, working with someone else, if there's someone there in your office that is specialized in working with trauma, then and you know you're going to have those heavy interviews or go through this questionnaire, then maybe you want to invite them into that session. The other section that we wanted to touch with a little bit was the culture specific healing. And Norma shared with me some ways that they do that at their organization, and I wanted to know what you guys do. So let her tell you, and then maybe you guys can share with us what you're doing.
So yeah, so regarding healing, and we provide services to immigrant victims of domestic violence and stalking. However, we have a particular emphasis within the Latino community just because the population that lives in our county is more Hispanic. So we working with Hispanic population, I mean, they don't believe in therapies because no estoy loca, I'm not crazy to go to a therapist. Just crazy people go to over there. So we try to find some other ways of healing, and we try the meditation, and it worked very, very good. I mean, they love to meditate. We had a teacher who has been working with us for the last 5 years, I guess, and she provides meditation, and they really are into it, which was something that I was not thinking that would work. But again, let's go back where we have to take out our bias, because for me, and as a Hispanic, for the way that I was raised, and so I would think more of therapy rather than meditation. However, for them was more meditation rather than therapy. And the other thing is, during the pandemic, we met a teacher who does these mindfulness, meditation, art, and creativity, which is just active meditation through doodling. Basically, is that, So we breathe, we learn how to breathe, we focus. Is the mindfulness, because you take the time just to be focused on drawing lines, points, circles. I mean, it's not a drawing or a painting class. It's more how to be still while you're doodling, right? And then we started this class, and look, well, this is me, this is Kenya, and then this is my design, the first on the right side, but the others are my clients' design. So they really learn how to do these, and there are so many scientific benefits of doing this mindfulness or meditation, active meditation, because sometimes people with trauma might not feel comfortable to start doing the silent meditation, but the active one, it helps a lot, and they can get focused, and they can and they're healing, and now they are loving. I mean, they're always asking me to do this class, which is funny, but also they learn to do it with their children. So this is not just a client class, but also it has been helpful for the children and the whole family. You go to the next one, Lucio. And yeah, so these are some opportunities, and I'm just sharing, some pictures of my clients. Of course, I have a release of photo for my clients in order to share with you, but some opportunities where we were talking about, how would you like to heal? What do you want to do? And this is, a vigil where they wanted to do some posters and t-shirts and be participative. They make the decoration, and they were there, they wanted to be part of this event. Here it was more sharing some posters about, or some messages for advocates, and it was very powerful for them and for us, because some of their messages were more like, don't stop and believe in me, please thank you, and keep doing whatever you are doing for me to be healthy, or to be safe, or to be, and that empowers them, but also empower us to keep doing what we're doing. And again, some sessions where they wanted to hug, and they wanted to talk, and they wanted to eat, and potluck, and things like that, where they're creating also their own friendship, but also they can help each other, right? Next.
Yeah, these are nice. Is there something that you guys have done in your organizations? Or Norma is located in, you get a question to where you have, where are these,
Georgia.
yeah, where are these great services? So you're about 45 minutes from Atlanta, is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Canton, Georgia. So yes. And we have been creating this, attending to their needs. Of course, they have to tell us, because again, I can say what would be helpful for me or what I think that would be helpful for them. However, it wouldn't work, right? So I have to ask them, what do you need? What would you like to see? Like they love, before the pandemic, they love to do this through our Hispanic leadership workshops. I mean, we provide a workshop, but in the meanwhile, they like it to do a potluck. So they were providing food from different countries and we were sharing at that time together. It was helpful, you know, and then they heal because at the same time they are learning one from each other, right? How do I connect services with the district attorney? Well, it took us time. Let me tell you, you know, it was several years, but my executive, I mean, Canton is a small city, and the courthouse is over there, and we have the DA and the solicitors, and my boss, my executive director, has been living over there forever, so she knows everybody. So it took us some years actually to start creating that relationship, but right now they know us, we know them, they know what we do, and when we need that helpfulness from them and when they need us, right? So we respect each other. I don't share things with them, they don't share things with them, but then we feel comfortable to tell the client, you know, this criminal case is going to be with the DA or with the solicitor. However, I mean, you can trust the victim advocates because they're going to be calling you. They're going to be calling you in Spanish. They're going to be, or in any other language, because they're going to be providing interpretation. They're going to be asking you some questions, and it's okay to help because you have to be open so they can get the case, you know, and things like that. So we communicate each other. We really have a good relationship, and we meet virtually right now, you know, because they're super busy always. But it has been useful. It's a win-win for everybody because at the end of the day, we're working for the same goal, right? So that's why it's very important to create that collaboration. They refer victims of your office? Yes, definitely. I mean, they referred them to us, and we let the clients know that they will be receiving a phone call or an email or a letter or a mail, you know, from the DAs or the solicitors advocates, because they are going to be requesting more information. So yeah. Exactly, collaboration is important, and we can create it, and it's step by step. I was sharing with Rocio and Leslie that when I started working in this agency, which was 8 years ago, I didn't know anybody from law enforcement. I knew that there was, you know, Canton PD, but I didn't know anybody. So they have this coffee with a cup. And I said, let's start for that, you know, baby steps. Sometimes it's going to start like baby steps. So I went to take a coffee with a cup, and then I introduced myself and bring all my cards and my posters and all my information. And I was with the chief of police, and I said, hey, you know, we answer the statewide domestic violence hotline in Spanish language. However, and it's a statewide, it's not just my city, it's a statewide. However, I would like to learn if you have some best practices to provide language access to the victims, you know. And he was like, no, no, we don't have. And I was like, how many of your officers are bilingual, or at least to speak Spanish? Because, you know, the population in the city is huge for Guatemalans. So sometimes for them, the Spanish is the second language because they speak dialects. But have you think about that? And he just say, no, I didn't know, I'm new, and that's it, you know. But 4 months after, I saw him in an event, I don't even remember where, and he came to me and say, Norma, do you remember the conversation that we had about officers? Yes. Well, now I have 8 bilingual officers in Canton PD. For me, it was like, wow, you know, it's not that I made the change, but he at least realized that the population that he was serving was Hispanic, and that's the need that they had to have some bilingual officers. So sometimes it's just baby steps, truly. Just take a coffee with your law enforcement or your or your DAs and solicitors, and try to be there present and let them know the needs that the immigrant victims have, so you can start creating that collaboration.
Yeah, that's wonderful. That's what you're getting in the chat. And then somebody wants to know if you would do a mindful doodling workshop for us. No pressure.
Yes, of course. Yeah, we can do it. I love it.
The next part is talking about self-care, because we talked about getting out the trauma. I think very interesting questions from Jacqueline, and I think it's a good way of knowing where we need to go next in our learning and learning from each other, and maybe setting out the session maybe 2 months out so that we can get the rest of the group that didn't make it here, that was here last time. But those are some really, I'm very learning so much from you each time. And then also Zakia has other slides and pictures too. And so when we pick up on this in August, we can learn from her and how their outreach, because the way we looked at this, right, was first, what is trauma? What is a trauma-informed approach? Why do you need to have it? But also, how are you going to get people, how your organization also, the next part was about having a healthy organization, right? Because Norma was telling me, she's like, you can't be saying we're going to be trauma-informed approach and we're going to do this and we're going to do that. And then meanwhile, everybody has closed doors and nobody says good morning, and you're not doing something within your team to be inclusive, to understand they have trauma. A lot of us work in this work because we're survivors ourselves. And so we're going to pick up on how to have things that we can do to have a healthy organization. I know we're not executive directors of our organizations, but things to think about, to take back, because we can't get there with survivors if we're not putting in these practices with each other and within our organizations and in how we do our outreach. So much, and we'll see you then. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Have a great evening. Bye.